Welcome to the Standing in This Place podcast. I'm Rachel Carter and I'm the artist behind this project, supported by National Lottery project grants through Arts Council England. I'm going to be telling the historic tale of the intertwining of the lives of women working in the textile mills of the industrial Midlands and the enslaved women working the cotton fields in America. For this episode of the podcast, I'm going to delve not into the history of a mill owner, but of my own ancestors. We're going to look at my 4 times great-grandparents, and I'm joined by my Uncle Mick, who I used to call Uncle Travelling Mick, and we're going to dive into our ancestral story. So the Crooks come from a long line of nail makers, so blacksmith nail makers, and they lived in a little area called Horsley Woodhouse. Generation after generation are living in this village, in this rural setting, and the main breadwinner is a blacksmith making nails. So then we see a sudden change in the family where they're answering a call for workers for a cotton mill, and this change is what we're going to delve into, where you see the whole family uprooting, leaving Horsley behind and moving to Darley Abbey on the outskirts of Derby City, so they can go and work in the cotton mill. But it's not the father, is it, that's going into the cotton mill?
You're right, there's 2 mills at Darley Abbey, the paper mill and the cotton mill. Rufus Crooks, that's right, yeah. Rufus and his wife Eliza, but yeah, and the children in turn all went to work in the cotton mill.
So we've got that move, that migration from rural to city living.
Yeah.
We've got 4 children going into the factory system, aged between 12 and 16 years. So we've got Elizabeth, Jane, Rufus and Sarah. So 4 siblings all going into work in the cotton mill.
Yeah.
So then I think that's going to completely change the family dynamic from, instead of it being the father as the breadwinner, it's now the children.
Yeah.
You know, and the father's working next door in the paper mill. We don't know, do we, what he was doing in the paper mill, whether he was using his blacksmithing skills on the machinery or as manual labour.
Yeah. I would imagine something to do with the form he had using his blacksmith skills. Any mill needed an engineer and as maintenance to keep the mills running, to keep the wheels turning, as you might say. So it's possible that he was on the maintenance side. He didn't take any paper mill type skills with him when he left. In fact, he was back into the nail industry. That was again moving on, but certainly the family at the time, like I say, we've got 4 siblings, the eldest ones working in the cotton mill, and living essentially on the doorstep of Derby City.
Well, we know that Sarah, Rufus, Jane and Elizabeth all worked in the cotton mill owned by the Evans family, which was named the Boarhead Mills because the boar was the emblem on the coat of arms for the Evans family. But then we see a few more children, as you've mentioned. You know, Rufus and Eliza Crooks are very busy and they have a lot of children. And then 1871, we see your great-grandmother and my 2 times great-grandmother, Mary Crooks, being born at the mill workers' cottage, number 2.
That's right.
Being born into this family of cotton mill workers. Yeah. So, and it's not long until she's actually also working within mills. So, but that takes us to another area of the country because, as you mentioned, their father Rufus was a blacksmith and was hopefully using his blacksmithing skills in the next door paper mill. We do know that the family started to migrate up to Lancashire, where Rufus was, I think, following work for blacksmith. And we do find the family, for a short time, splitting, some in Lancashire, some in Derbyshire, while Rufus is searching for work as a blacksmith.
That's right. I think, was it Sarah, was it the eldest girl? I think she stayed on in Darley Abbey and married and had children and settled in Darley Abbey, where the younger children with Rufus and Eliza, moved up to Lancashire. Essentially, I think Rufus was following work as a nail maker. Again, you've got, as a nail maker, the nail making industry saw a boom. The turn of the century with the railways, and certainly the railway expansion in America. Nail makers, or rather nails, were in big demand, but in short supply. So they were buying them from the UK, and of course Lancashire sits very close to Liverpool. Of course, that's where they made the nails, and they were sent across the Atlantic. So it's clear Rufus was obviously following the work, or as they call it now, following the money. But it was certainly, there was enough mills in Lancashire as well to provide work for the children. And obviously they moved up and found work and did very well. The majority of them having families in Lancashire. I think it was only Sarah that remained in Derbyshire at that time.
Well, I think we see, well, the family split to start with, where it's just Rufus going on his own, which must have been quite difficult to do,
right,
to go off on his own, leave the family behind, you know, a large growing family, and go search for work as a nail maker. But then bit by bit, they all start to migrate up to Lancashire. Slowly, as Rufus getting settled there, and there's quite a funny census return, isn't there, when he's up in Lancashire. The census scribe obviously visited, and a lot of people at that time, a lot of the working classes, could not write and read.
Right,
So it was the job of the scribe when they came to take the census details to fill that in, or alternatively they could go and take that form to somebody with some sort of role in the community, a shopkeeper, a tavern owner, that may be able to write and read and fill it out for them. But they obviously weren't used to his Derbyshire accent.
That's right. Where do you come from? This is Osley Wooders. Because it went down as Osley. O-S-L-E-Y, I think, was it?
Yeah, they'd wrote down Osley, Yorkshire.
Yeah.
Because they wasn't aware that areas of Derbyshire, including ourselves, we often drop our H's.
Yes.
So when he was asked where did he come from, instead of saying Horsley Woodhouse, he said Osley.
Yeah.
Which sent us on a very different path.
That's
thinking,
right.
well, he wasn't born in Yorkshire. This must be a different guy, but it ended up it was him, and it was the dialect. So we see Rufus from Osley settled now in Lancashire, and one by one, all the family then migrate up to Lancashire with them, and continue in that industry. So we've got Jane, one of the daughters. She's a cotton mill hand. We've got young Ruth. She's a Forstall spinner. We've got another here, a cotton towel maker, a cotton dyer, everything to do with cotton. So the cotton industry runs throughout our family DNA. It's there. And we do know that Sarah, who did stay behind in Darley Abbey, married and had 4 children, she does die at quite a young age, at 36, and it does make me wonder what led to her death at such an early age, and whether that was cotton related, because we do know that her brother Rufus, who went into the cotton mill, when he migrates up to Lancashire, he actually dies aged 29. He was a cotton mill hand.
That's right.
And we do have his death certificate, don't we? So let's dig that out.
He died of that cotton-related illness. Is it cotton on the lungs or something like that?
So he's 29 years old, and he's a labourer at a cotton mill, and the certified cause of death is phthisis. And we do know that phthisis is the medical term for cotton lung.
Right.
Like you suggested, where as they're working in the cotton mill, they're constantly breathing in fibres that fill the lung. and then make it impossible for them to breathe.
That's
So
right, yeah. Basically, they're suffocated, aren't they?
yeah, so it's a common killer for mill workers. So if they didn't lose a limb or fingers from being trapped in machinery, then cotton lung was the next thing on the long list of dangers. So it's how lightly, did Sarah also die of cotton lung, or she's quite young to be passing away at 36.
Yeah.
What made our Mary, that we're going to focus on now, what made her come back to Derbyshire to get married to William Henry Bramley?
Some of the thoughts that I've had, looking at the timing, is because of Sarah's demise and leaving, I think, was it 4 or 5 children?
5, yeah.
Certainly 3 of them being young and under the age of 5, infants. Sarah's husband would have needed someone to look after them. Obviously, there was no nurseries or agencies where you could fall back onto and say, can someone come to look after the children while I go to work? He had to find that himself, and of course still had to go to work. My thoughts are that certainly Sarah's father and siblings, as many as possible, would have come back for Sarah's funeral, including Mary, of course. And I think then, Mary being the youngest daughter, and I think probably about the age of 18, I believe, although at work, she would have been probably not nominated, but would probably volunteer to look after the children whilst their father went to work.
Yeah.
It's quite an involved year, that particular year, because I think Sarah died.
Let's have a look.
In the January.
So, see if your thoughts are on the right line. So, here we go. So Sarah, who married a gentleman with the last name Ford.
Yeah.
So she passes away in September 1891.
That's right, September 1891.
And we know from the 1891 census, which was taken in April, that Mary is living up in Lancashire, and she's a cotton towel maker.
Yeah. But looking at that, you've got, I think, it might have been her mother that died earlier that year. I know it was quite a traumatic year for Mary, particularly that year. Sister Sarah died in September, so I'm guessing that she came down with the family and but stayed after the funeral to look after Sarah's children. Certainly whilst their father was working and probably looking for someone to take their mother's place.
Yeah, that does make sense actually, doesn't it? Because
well, it follows that it's only December of that year that Mary marries William.
Yeah.
So she must have been around the Derby area in those months prior to that to have met William.
Yeah. And
formed a relationship. So that's what I'm thinking, that Mary was in Darley Abbey looking after Sarah's children.
That does make sense because, like you said, we see Mary, affectionately known as Polly, getting married to William Bramley on Christmas Day 1891.
That's right.
And then if we look at the next census, we see that William and Polly have been blessed with a child, Eliza Ann, in 1893. So there's a couple of years there.
Yeah.
But we also see in 1901 Jeremiah Ford, Sarah's husband, has remarried.
Yes.
So to a lady called Fanny, and all of the 5 children are there.
Yeah.
So it does make sense, because I've often wondered how someone that's living in Lancashire can then meet somebody, that's working over the border in Nottinghamshire, in Eastwood, as a miner. How do they meet? They're in 2 different industries. One's in cotton and one's in coal.
Yes. I can only assume that, she's had obviously some time off while looking after the children. To have met William as so many people did in those days, it was normally in a pub, and still do.
Yeah.
It's always been a great meeting place, but they've got to be in a close proximity.
Yeah.
And I think William was living in Ilkeston at the time.
He was, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly somewhere along those lines they've met, and it seems a very short courtship before they've married on Christmas Day. So I think that's probably how it happened.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense that Mary's lost quite a lot of people in a very short space of time.
Yeah.
But in that 1 year, she loses her mum.
Yeah, that's right.
She's already lost her brother to cotton lung.
Yeah.
Now she loses her oldest sister,
Yeah.
who's left behind 5 children.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that she'd travel back down from Lancashire to be back in Derbyshire and looking after her young niece and nephews.
I think that's the likely scenario for it.
Yeah, and then meets Mr. William Bramley.
Yeah, the love of her life.
Yeah, well, that's a very complex story for another time. Is the
Yes.
life of Mary and William.
Yeah.
But I think what we do know is that when they married on Christmas Day in 1891, they got married in Ilkeston, which, like we've said, it straddles that Derby-Nottingham border.
Yeah.
So, like so many border towns around here, you know, that sometimes they're Derbyshire, sometimes they're Nottinghamshire, or they could be Derbyshire with an NG postcode.
That's like we are.
So we know that they got married in Ilkeston on Christmas Day and settled in an area that's now long since gone. But there's quite a funny story that relates back to the both of us, and it's often when you're doing all these family research and trying to find your roots and understand motivations behind actions. I don't know. Sometimes you don't. It helps to fill out those blanks and you figure out who you are, who your ancestors are. But then you see these sudden sort of like these ripple events from the past. You know that like these echoes, and I think Mary and William moving to this area of Ilkeston had a direct impact on both of our careers, which we didn't know.
Yes.
Because this area, you know, is now demolished and sits under what's now a Tesco car park.
That's right. Yeah.
But literally 2 streets away is where I set up my very first art studio called Shed 2 Studios.
Yeah.
Was just drawn to this building. It was a fantastic place, and I was there for around 8 years. But it's also the same area where it impacted on your first job, didn't it?
That's right, yeah, because when I left the Air Force in it was December 1983, but I joined the Derbyshire Police Force in the January of 1984. And my first posting, or first station, was Ilkeston. Not that I asked for it, it was just, well, you seem to be local, you can go, there's an opportunity to slot there, so off you go to Ilkeston. And I was walking the beat of Ilkeston because as a probationary constable, you get given a foot beat, or we did in those days, which is a certain part of the town. Town centre at weekends, on nights, everybody in the town centre, but during the week you went in, you had your own patch, and you could get to know the people in that area. And it's quite enlightening to find, you know, I've been down streets and in houses where I go back now and find, having researched, I found the street, I think I've been in that house, I've been next door. You know, I knew those people and didn't realise at the time that they were, you know, distant relatives. So it's, it's quite intriguing, really.
Yeah.
Quite intriguing.
It's quite, isn't it quite strange to think that, you know, when you've been, you know, during your career as a police officer, that you've been walking and peddling the beat, going
very
around
much so.
all of these areas where our ancestors all lived and dwelled.
It does. I have that echo of, you know, I've been here before, you know, and, you know, having researched my family tree, it says all my family were around, or not all of them, but a big part of them was around here. And then, because we now live in Langley Mill, but we're moving on a little bit to William Bramley. They lived at Heanor, William and Mary, for a short while, and then moved to Langley Mill. Their house was on North Street, which is a 5-minute walk from here. But at the time, the Derbyshire Police Service had a police house on the junction of Station Road and Alders Lane. The house is still there now, although it's a house now and occupied, but the sign is still on the wall there saying it used to be the police station. And of course, at that time, same as my sergeant did at Cotmanay, he lived there with his family. So you got a police officer, the police officer for Langley Mill, living there with his wife and children. But it also had a local lockup.
Yes.
Which is where William, great-grandfather, found himself on the night of the census of...
Let's have a look for that.
1911.
So let's delve into our archive. So, like you mentioned, when Mary and William married in 1891, they then moved on to Heanor, which is under Derbyshire, another border town, and they lived on Nook End.
That's right.
But then once they moved down to down the hill, down into Langley Mill, and we see the 1911 census, we've got Mary, and she said she's wife in charge.
That's right.
There they are on North Street with 4 of the children, George, Henry, Mabel and Polly. But where's the dad? And this took some doing to find, but we're looking now at the 1911 census for police officer Charles Alonzo Stone.
That's right.
And he's at the constabulary home with his wife and children, but look who's in the local nick.
William Bramley, prisoner.
It says that he's married, is aged 42, and is a colliery labourer above ground. So it's quite interesting that we're coming back round again.
Yes.
You know, we've started in Derbyshire, and we've got a blacksmith family moving into the mills. The kids are going into work in the cotton industry, and that following of that cotton route from Derbyshire up to Lancashire, then back again.
Yeah.
And then we've gone now from cotton into coal, but then how that mirroring and those echoes have reflected in both of our own careers, and that sort of crossing over, you know, that and finding, you know, is it quite strange for you as a retired PC to find our own ancestors actually on the wrong side of the law?
It's a little bit embarrassing, but I think it's no different to a lot of other people that have researched their family tree and found, yes, there's skeletons in the cupboard.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same with a lot of people. If you delve back far enough, people were people as they are now, and there's still people, even though there might be working people, not criminals, but can still fall foul of the law for different reasons these days. But there'll be social reasons, and not born out of criminality, if you know what I mean. And William, I think, was just the same. He was a victim of circumstances. Things got out of hand, and he had to spend a night away from home.
Yeah.
And of course, he had to spend a night with Constable Alonzo. But it just happened to be on the night of the census.
Yeah.
Why pick that night of all nights? If it hadn't been, we probably wouldn't have known about that.
No, and it's interesting, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
I suppose you're looking at you know, at those and reflecting on your own career, and you know, when I'm looking at the ancestry, for me, I'm very interested in the stories of our female ancestors, but also of people that make things for a living and use their hands to create, because that's my common link that I'm looking for in my ancestors. So I suppose we all take something quite different from our own sort of looking at our family trees.
Yeah.
You know, and that fascination and feeling those echoes from the past.
It's surprising how things come around. Like I say, with the echoes, it's not the echoes. I mean, certainly I felt that I've been walking, certainly as a police officer at Ilkeston, walking the beat, following in my ancestors' footsteps. Not that any of those were police officers, but certainly I've walked the same ground, gone down the same streets.
I think what we've found with looking into the lives of our ancestors, you know, that they're coming into the cotton system, the cotton mill system, towards the tail end of the Industrial Revolution, and you know that infrastructure's there, so that the children are finding a lot of work within the mills. That as they go into adulthood, if they survive into adulthood and cotton doesn't get them, that there's those railways to move then the populace from Derby into Lancashire, where there's a lot more factories as well.
A lot more mills,
a lot more cotton industry running in there. But then our lives would have been quite different had Mary not have come back to tend to
Sarah's children,
and then met Mr. Bramley and settled here. You know, it's interesting when you look at your roots. You know, that we are very rooted here, and you know, when you explain about sort of walking the beat as a policeman and walking in those very footsteps, because a lot of time I think we're lucky in one way that they went into that area of Derby because that cottage still stands and there's very little left for working class ancestry to go and find.
But it's an insight into the past that you don't often get. Quite often you look at, say, an ancestor's on such and such a street which has now been demolished, or a lot of them now where William and his family lived in Ilkeston, there's now a Tesco car park. But it wasn't at the time when I was walking the beat, because I did have that area just off Station Road at Ilkeston as part of my beat, and I did do a lot of work down there. The streets, certainly the street where Grandad William and his family lived, I would have walked down and not realised it at the time, because you don't know until you research the family tree. But I've certainly walked down there, although the streets aren't there now, of course. But I think it's satisfying to know that you know we are rooted, and we still live in the area where we have roots.
Over the coming months, the project will be developing, and there's lots of ways that you can get in touch and find out more. Just head to my website and click on the project page, Standing in This Place. I really hope that you've enjoyed delving into the life of my ancestors as much as I have, and thank you to my Uncle Mick.
You're welcome, Rachel.